A two-bedroom apartment in Toronto cost $2,400 a month in 2022. 2 years later, $3,300. That's a 25% increase per year. Not in Manhattan, not in Singapore, in Canada, a country that was supposed to be the answer. 2 million Canadians visited a food bank in a single year, the highest number ever recorded in this country's history. A nurse, a software engineer, a teacher, skipping meals, not because Canada ran out of resources, not because the economy collapsed, because a series of decisions made by people who believed they were solving problems quietly made an entire country impossible to live in. This is how it happened. The Promise. October 19, 2015. Justin Trudeau walks into a Montreal metro station on his first day as Prime Minister-elect. He takes selfies with commuters. He's laughing. They're laughing. The clip goes viral instantly. Canada had just elected the son of a former prime minister, young, bilingual, charismatic, a man who seemed to carry the weight of genuine optimism rather than political performance. He ran on 3 words: real change now. And Canadians believed him. Trudeau entered office with the second highest approval rating of any new prime minister in Canadian history. This wasn't a reluctant mandate. This wasn't a country settling. This was a country choosing, loudly and clearly, to believe in something. 9 years later, only 26% of Canadians wanted him to remain in office. 33% approval rating. Protests in the streets. A political career in free fall. What happened in between isn't just a story about one man's failure. It's a story about geography, about demographics, about what happens when a government mistakes ambition for strategy and ordinary people pay the price. To understand how Canada arrived here, we need to go much further back than 2015, further back than most people think. The Geographic Foundation. Look at a map of Canada. Really look at it. The second largest country on Earth by total landmass. Nearly 10 million square kilometers of forests, tundra, plains, and mountain ranges. And for most of its history, it was almost entirely empty. In the mid-1800s, Canada's population clung to 2 corridors, the banks of the St. Lawrence River and the shores of the Great Lakes. A thin ribbon of settlement pressed against the American border, surrounded by wilderness that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. The government in Ottawa looked west and saw not just opportunity, they saw vulnerability. An unsettled territory is a territory someone else can claim. So Canada ran a campaign. Build your nest in Western Canada, the government's marketing materials read. The new El Dorado. This wasn't an invitation. It was a recruitment drive, targeted, specific, and designed to select exactly the right kind of person. Canada wanted skilled farmers who could break the land, build townships, attract commerce, and anchor Canada's claim to the West before anyone else did. It worked. Between the mid-1800s and 1920, Canada's population tripled, from roughly 3 million to 9 million people. Cities rose on the prairies. The Canadian Pacific Railway stitched 5,000 kilometers of wilderness into a single country. A nation was physically constructed through the deliberate movement of human beings. But there was a darker layer beneath that success. Canada wasn't selecting on merit alone. It was selecting on race, explicitly. Asian immigrants were charged a head tax designed to make immigration financially impossible. Eastern Europeans were classified and ranked. The selection criteria were discriminatory, deeply embedded in the structures of a young nation, and it would take decades and a world war to begin dismantling them. The gold standard. After World War II, the world changed. So did Canada. The old logic that a country could openly select immigrants by ethnicity had been discredited by events so catastrophic they reshuffled the moral architecture of the entire Western world. Canada needed a new system, and what it built would eventually be called the gold standard of immigration policy. A points system, simple in concept, radical in effect. Instead of asking, "Where are you from?" Canada started asking, "What can you do?" Points were awarded for age, education, professional training, and language proficiency. The more an applicant had to offer the Canadian economy, the higher the score. The higher the score, the faster the path to permanent residency. Contributions, not origins. Capability, not ethnicity. It was the oldest system of its kind in the OECD, and it worked for decades. But even gold standards need maintenance. By the 1970s, the percentage of newcomers arriving as family members, rather than as economic contributors, was quietly rising. In 1971, economic migrants made up 73% of newcomers. By the early 1980s, those numbers had nearly reversed. The government acted. Family reunification pathways were tightened. Entry requirements were stricter. By 1995, the family member share had been pulled back to 36%. This is what made Canada's system exceptional. Not just what it was designed to do, but the government's demonstrated ability to adjust it when it drifted off course. To treat immigration as a living policy, not a fixed ideology. By the early 2000s, the system was being cited internationally as a model worth copying. In 2018, 2/3 of Canadians said immigration was good for the country, the highest proportion of any nation in the OECD. This wasn't a polarized debate. It was a national consensus. Canada had built something genuinely rare. And then the pressure arrived. The problem behind the plan. Canada was aging, and not slowly. In 1971, there were 7 working-age Canadians for every senior citizen in the country. By 2012, that ratio had fallen to 4. By 2036, economists projected a ratio of just 2 workers for every retiree. Think about what that means for a country that funds its hospitals through payroll taxes, that pays its pensioners through contributions from people who are currently working, that staffs its care facilities with people who are currently employed. The math was a slow-moving emergency. Sean Fraser, Trudeau's Minister of Immigration, looked at these numbers and saw a lever, not a limit. Immigration, in his framing, wasn't a social policy, it was a precision tool. A way to inject working-age people into specific sectors of a specific economy at a specific time. Healthcare gaps, construction shortfalls, pension pressure, all of it, in theory, solvable through targeted newcomer recruitment. In 2022, Canada already set a record for population growth. Then the government decided to go further. 2023, 465,000 permanent residents. 2024, 485,000. 2025, 500,000. A race for global talent, Fraser called it. Canada intended to win. And on paper, on a whiteboard, in a government ministry, in a policy document, the plan made a certain kind of sense. But there were warning signs that didn't make it into the press release. Canada's immigration processing system was already 2 million applications behind schedule before the new targets were announced. Canada was already experiencing a significant housing shortage before a single new target was set. The infrastructure, the housing, the hospitals, the schools, the transit systems, needed to absorb hundreds of thousands of new residents per year simply wasn't there. The government saw immigration as the solution. They didn't ask whether the country was ready to receive it. The crack in the foundation. Here is the first rule of population growth. You cannot pour people into a country faster than you can build the infrastructure to hold them. Canada broke that rule, systematically, for 3 consecutive years. In 2023, Canada's population grew at its fastest rate in nearly 70 years, the fastest growth of any country in the developed world. But housing construction didn't accelerate to match it. Building permits, zoning approval, material supply, skilled labor, all of it operates on timelines that government population targets don't wait for. Toronto, a 2-bedroom in 2022, $2,400 a month. By 2024, $3,300. In most Canadian cities, you needed to earn at least twice the minimum wage to afford a 1-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of your income on rent. In Toronto and Vancouver, buying a home had become unattainable for the top 10% of earners. Not the poorest Canadians, the top 10%. Between 2022 and 2024, the number of temporary residents in Canada, international students, temporary foreign workers, visa holders, doubled. From 1.4 million to 2.8 million people, all of them needing somewhere to live. In a market that was already failing the people already there. In Brampton, Ontario, a story went viral. 25 students, 1 basement. When journalists asked the mayor to respond, he didn't express shock or outrage. He said he'd seen cases like this on a regular basis. Meanwhile, the federal government kept releasing economic growth data. GDP was rising, but the growth was almost entirely driven by population size, not individual productivity. Per capita GDP was declining. Individual living standards were falling, while the headline numbers looked fine. The Reckoning. July 2024. Canadians protested in the streets, in cities across the country. Canada does not have a protest culture the way France does, or Brazil, or the United States. When Canadians take to the streets in numbers, something has broken. In 2022, 27% of Canadians believed there was too much immigration. By 2023, 51%, a majority. For the first time in the modern era. By 2024, 58%. In 2 years, public opinion had reversed completely. The country that in 2018 had the highest pro-immigration sentiment of any developed nation now had a majority saying, "We've had enough." Trudeau's approval rating fell to 33% in September 2024. Only 26% of Canadians wanted him to remain as Prime Minister. Something had to change. Trudeau announced a policy reversal. Canada would lower the number of new permanent residents. The race for global talent was being called off. And then came the admission. Standing before cameras, Trudeau acknowledged it himself. His government had not gotten the balance quite right. The rapid pace of newcomers had added pressure to the housing market. YouTube comments, perhaps the most unfiltered barometer of public sentiment that exists, were immediate. "It's crazy that people believe the guy who got us into this mess is the guy who's going to get us out. Too little, too late. You cannot be the solution to a problem you created." The man Trudeau appointed to lead Canada's housing recovery? Sean Fraser, his former Minister of Immigration. The architect of the growth plan now handed the portfolio for housing affordability. It was the kind of irony that wouldn't feel plausible in a film script. The numbers don't negotiate. When the data comes in, it doesn't argue with you. It just tells you what happened. In 2019, 19% of Canadians said the country was extremely unequal. By 2024, 38%. Doubled in 5 years. In 2019, 66% of Canadians said the cost of living was getting worse. By 2024, 84%. These are not fringe responses. These are the answers of a country watching its own standard of living decline in real time and being honest about what it sees. And here is the part that demands to be said clearly. This was not inevitable. Canada's immigration system, the points-based model it spent 70 years building and refining, was working. The failure wasn't immigration. The failure was speed without infrastructure, scale without strategy, numbers without the housing, healthcare, or schools to absorb them. And the people who paid the heaviest price weren't the policymakers. They were the immigrants themselves, people who came to Canada in good faith, following the rules of a system that actively recruited them. People who arrived to find basements overcrowded, rents unaffordable, and a public increasingly convinced that their presence was the cause of the problem rather than the symptom of a system failure. They didn't create the housing shortage. They just arrived to find it. The bigger map. Zoom out far enough, and Canada looks like it should have no problems. The second largest country on Earth. Freshwater reserves that will matter more every decade as the world runs hotter and drier. Oil beneath Alberta. Timber across the Boreal. Rare earth deposits in the Shield. Coastlines on 3 oceans. A country with everything. And yet, here we are. The lesson of Canada isn't really about immigration. It's not about Justin Trudeau or Sean Fraser or any single policy decision made in any single year. The lesson of Canada is what happens when a government mistakes an aspiration for a plan. When the desire to solve a problem moves faster than the capacity to handle the consequences. History shows us this pattern more times than we can count. The people who came west to build Canada in the 1850s didn't ask for much. They wanted land, stability, and the chance to build something that would outlast them. Canada delivered on that promise. It built a nation. A century and a half later, a new wave of Canadians arrived with degrees, skills, and exactly the same hope. And this time, the country wasn't ready. 2 million people visited a food bank in a single year. The percentage who said the cost of living was deteriorating rose to 84%. The percentage who felt the country had become extremely unequal doubled in 5 years. These are not abstractions. These are people. And the gap between what a country promises and what it can actually deliver has a cost. Paid not in policy papers or approval ratings, but in the daily lives of ordinary people trying to afford a place to sleep. Canada is not broken beyond repair. It still holds the cards, the land, the resources, the institutional memory of a system that genuinely worked. But a nation that forgets why its system worked, that mistakes scale for strength and speed for progress, will find a way to make itself impossible, even with everything, even from the second largest territory on Earth. Drop a comment. Do you think Canada can course correct in time, or has the damage already been done? The bigger map was always there. We just stopped reading it. If this made you see Canada differently, that's the point. Thanks for being here. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we go deeper. The map is always bigger than they're showing you.